Many people have talked about what the church can learn from the 12 steps of AA. In today's episode, I'd like to talk about something less well known, namely the 12 traditions. Stay tuned. Hello, friends. Pastor Tim Westermeyer here, Senior Pastor of St. Philip the Deacon in the western suburbs of Minneapolis. Good to be with you as always. This is the week after the week when we celebrated the 4th of July. I happened to be preaching this past weekend, and so in my sermon, I tied together the preamble of the Constitution, which I remember from, I don't know if any of you remember the Schoolhouse Rock days. There was the preamble to the Constitution, there was conjunction, junction, there was I'm just a bill. Anyway, I talked a little about that. I connected it to the 6th chapter of the Gospel of Mark, where, among other things, Jesus sends the disciples out to do his work. And I talked about how 2,000 years later, Jesus is still inviting us to go out and to do that, and I reflected on what that might look like and how before we go out and try to change the world, God is inviting us first to allow God to change us, to heal us, to make us whole, to forgive us. And that got into some conversation about, among other things, the Serenity Prayer. I mentioned in my message that the AA tradition, the recovery tradition, had come up, and as I was preparing for that sermon, and I did quote a variation of the Serenity Prayer, which I will quote again for you here now. The Serenity Prayer is originally by Reinhold Niebuhr. I think most people are familiar with it. Maybe we'll show it up on the screen. But the variation, which is anonymous, is this: God grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, the courage to change the one I can, and the wisdom to know it's me, which was directly related or connected to the point of my sermon, which is, again, as God calls us into lives of spreading God's love, we have to recognize that first and foremost we have to receive that love for ourselves. And rather than go out and be judgmental or wagging a finger at other people, we've got to just accept God's love, allow ourselves to be forgiven, and to try to bring that posture of love and forgiveness to a hurting world. Anyway, one of the things I mentioned in that message is that, and I've already said it here, is I sort of stumbled across some different references to AA or the recovery movement as I was preparing for the sermon. And in addition to the Serenity Prayer, which is obliquely connected to the recovery movement, one commentator lifted up something called the 12 Principles of AA. That's different than the 12 Steps. I actually have... This was a gift of a friend from recovery, the AA Big Book here. And on page 564 are what are called the short version of the 12 traditions, which we hear about less frequently than the 12 steps. And one commentator, just sort of as a thought experiment, asked the question whether those 12 traditions might also be applied in some helpful or meaningful way to the church, to the Christian tradition, to the Christian movement. I'm not going to list all 12 of them, but maybe I'll pick up about half of them. And again, I lift them up just for us to sort of sit with as a bit of a thought experiment for us to reflect on, are these postures or perspectives helpful for us as we think about who we are as a congregation, or who we are as a tradition, or who we are as the Christian movement. So again, this is from the 12 traditions from AA. 1, our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends on church unity. I'm using the word church, by the way, here in place of AA, as suggested by this commentator. So our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon church unity. I read that and I think, there's a lot to be said for church unity, as a matter of fact, and we often suffer when churches are split or divided over things. 2, for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience. 3, the only requirement for church membership is a desire to stop drinking. That's the way it appears in the actual AA book. And so for that, substitute is a desire to follow Jesus, right? So the only requirement for church membership is a desire to follow Jesus. I like that as well. 4, each group should be autonomous except in matters affecting other groups or church as a whole. 5, each group has but one primary purpose: to carry its message to the alcoholic or the Christ follower who still suffers. And then I'll lift up just 2 more. They're sort of related, 6 and 10. 6, a church ought never endorse, finance, or lend the church name to any related facility or outside enterprise, lest problems of money, property, and prestige divert us from our primary purpose, like that. Or 10, church has no opinion on outside issues. Hence, the church name ought never be drawn into public controversy. That one, I guess, I wonder about how that would work, because Jesus, of course, got himself into some trouble by challenging things publicly. But anyway, this is one of those things this past weekend that got left. I'll call it on the cutting room floor, right? I sort of mentioned it in a bit of a throwaway line, and I thought I would just lift those up, and I leave them with you again as sort of thought experiments to reflect on. Do you find those helpful as you reflect on what the church is and what we do? And if not, why? And are there other ways that you think about who the church is and how we act in the world, what our posture is, that might be helpful? And if you have thoughts about that, as always, I would love to hear about them, and I'm sure other people would as well. And in this week following the 4th of July, I do hope you had a safe and healthy and fun 4th of July celebration, and I'm grateful for your time with me today. And until next time, as always, be well, stay in touch, and God bless.
What those founding fathers set out to do.
We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility.